Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Grace. And we're going to get started here. So today we have another big award. Actually, all ASLO awards are big awards. And today we are presenting the Ruth Patrick Award. And first, again, I would like to thank the subcommittee who worked hard on all the nominations, and give them a big round of applause. I don't think anyone is here, but if they are. Okay, so today we are presenting the Ruth Patrick Award, which honors scientists who have applied the aquatic sciences towards solving critical environmental problems. The 2024 Ruth Patrick Award is presented today to Bernard Sweeney for a wide range of outstanding scientific achievements focused on root causes of degradation in aquatic systems, and for ensuring that these findings result in improved management and restoration. In his early days as a student, Bernard began as a graduate student of Ruth Patrick, basing his research out of Stroud Water Research Center in Pennsylvania. He then moved on to other supervisors, but his career was significantly influenced by Ruth Patrick's many accomplishments. Bernard's research focuses on aquatic ecology, specifically on stream macroinvertebrates, and has resulted in revolutionizing model ecological concepts, including the thermal equilibrium concept. His solutions to environmental degradation later moved upslope from riparian buffers to pioneering research on improved management of agricultural lands. From 1989 to 2017, Bernard served as the president and executive director of the Stroud Water Research Center, where he supported research centered around reversing degradation in aquatic ecosystems and riparian habitats. In 2014, he established the Stroud Center's Watershed Restoration Program that combined scientific research, environmental education, public outreach, and land preservation, reforestation, and conservation agriculture. I quote from the nomination letter: "This program has helped farmers implement conservation agriculture with research demonstrating different techniques such as cover crops that can increase groundwater recharge, reduce contamination of adjoining waterways, while simultaneously increasing farm profitability." Bernard was also active on an international level and established successful conservation programs in Costa Rica and influencing other international programs. One of Ruth Patrick's legacies to limnology is the value of mentorship. While each generation of scientists must grapple with new environmental challenges, their success is due in part to the inspiration provided by their mentors. In her footsteps, Bernard Sweeney has mentored a generation of scientists at the Stroud Center and the University of Pennsylvania, and through his numerous functions within the Society for Freshwater Science. Bernard Sweeney has always worked to integrate scientific research with environmental education, public outreach, preservation, reforestation, and conservation. This significant and impactful work has earned him previous awards and recognition. Quoting the nominator, "Dr. Sweeney is a rare scientist who worked simultaneously for policy change, community engagement, and public education to achieve a greater and more lasting impact. Certainly, like Dr. Ruth Patrick, it is clear that Dr. Sweeney has made a significant contribution to the field of aquatic ecology that will persist far into the future. We at ASLO are now extremely proud to present Bernard Sweeney with the Ruth Patrick Award." Bernard.
And it's my honor as president of ASLO on behalf of the ASLO board and the award committee and award subcommittee to present the 2024 Ruth Patrick Award to Bernard Sweeney. So well deserved.
Thank you. Stand on the other side. Stage is yours.
Well, thank you, ASLO. I have to tell you, when I received this email from Pac Libert saying that I won the award, I felt like I had just hit a walk-off home run for the Philadelphia Phillies in the 12th inning. It was like the greatest feeling of my life. It's definitely one of the great accolades of my career, and a good ending to my career, I think. But it made me reflect a bit on how did I arrive here? You know, why am I up on this podium? Why me for this award? And after thinking about it, I realized that it really gets back to what Alana was just saying. It was good mentorship. And so I want to speak just a few minutes about my mentorship and what the value of mentoring is, and how it's important to be mentored. And this is timely because I was reading the May 24th issue of Science flying out here yesterday, and there's an article on there that says that the National Science Foundation is now requiring on every grant proposal a one-page document that outlines your mentorship program for students associated with that project. So it's here, and it's good that it's here. For me, there was, I think, four main reasons that I'm standing on this podium right at the moment. One, I met the right kind of people, often by accident, but I met the right people. I listened to them, and I worked hard. I was lucky. And of course, the last not but least, I did some good science and applied it to some important issues. And so those were sort of my things. This was my first mentor. He was Dr. Ellery French. He was an entomologist. He was chairman of the biology department at Delaware Valley University, where I went. And frankly, I went to Del Val as a pre-med student. I majored in biology because I felt like that's what I had to do to get into medical school. I mean, I had no real interest in biology per se, but that's what that's what I needed to do. I worked hard the first year, and at the end of my first year, Ellery French called me into his office, and he said, and that's the first time I ever met him because he was chairman of the department, and I was just an incoming freshman. And he said, I've been hearing some good things about you from my faculty. Tell me about what your career goals are with your biology degree. And I said, well, frankly, I'm just using it to get into medical school, and I'm going to be an eye doctor. And he said, wow, that's a pretty narrowly focused thing for an 18-year-old. And I said, well, you asked, and that's why I'm here. And so he said, well, we could talk about that later, but in the meantime, he said, I'm looking for somebody to work in my laboratory. I needed a student for a couple of years, and you've been recommended to me, and I do research. I'm an entomologist. I do research on new pesticides that are being developed for both target and non-target insects, and both terrestrial and aquatic. And you'd be expected to work 10 hours a week in my laboratory during the school year, and I would expect you to work the entire summer for me without break on a mosquito, adult mosquito program that I run. And I'll pay you $2 an hour. I said, I'll take it. $2 an hour was a good rate back then, right? And so anyway, I joined I worked in his laboratory. I was the only one in his laboratory, and I was overseeing experiments for him on mosquito larvae and fish and chicken lice and all kinds of interesting things. And I also became an expert on identifying adult mosquitoes. I had to learn all the eastern mosquitoes by sight under a microscope, and I needed to be identified on the species. Well, I have to tell you that it was an exciting period for me in the beginning. And what happened was that the job erased medical school from my mind. I had been corrupted by the excitement of research and trying to answer questions. And it was something that I never had experienced before, and it was invigorating. And so I worked in his laboratory, and I ran the, among other things, I ran the mosquito survey that he was doing over a 600 square mile area, 30 light traps. I would collect the light traps every week and identify all the mosquitoes in it. And basically, at the end of the summer of 1970, I wrote this report and gave it to Dr. French, and he in turn was going to give it to whoever was sponsoring the project, which was the Bucks County Mosquito Control Program. And he liked the report, and he said, we ought to give this paper at the meeting of the Entomological Society of America that's going to take place in March at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And I didn't know anything about giving papers or anything like that. I said, sure. He said, well, you make the tables and graphs up for presentation. We'll go over it, but he'll give the presentation, right? Because he's the senior person. So I did that, and basically he said to me, there's two other reasons why I want to take you to the Academy of Natural Sciences. One is I want you to meet Dr. Sam Roback, who is the chief aquatic entomologist at the Academy, and he's studying polluted and pristine rivers across the United States, and he's doing all the macroinvertebrate work. He's a good man to know, and he's an expert in his field, and he knows almost all of the genera and species of aquatic macroinvertebrates in the country. But the other reason I want to take you to Philadelphia is that maybe if we're lucky, we'll get a chance to meet Ruth Patrick. She is running the limnology department at the Academy of Natural Sciences, a department that had over 150 employees in 1971. She was doing surveys across the country. She was also a full professor at the University of Pennsylvania, teaching courses in physical, chemical, and biological limnology, 3 different courses. And by the way, she had just become a member of the National Academy of Sciences at the age of 65. He told me that it would be great if I could meet her, but she's busy and it probably might not happen because she was running river surveys across the country since 1948. And she was doing work in Texas, in California, everywhere. And she had a team of scientists that she was working with, and she herself was a bona fide scientist, and that she was an expert on identifying diatoms, freshwater diatoms. And she would use the species of diatoms to tell her how clean or dirty a given river was, along with data on other groups of biological organisms. She had already finished volume 1 of her series called The Diatoms of the United States, and she was busy. She had assembled this team, I said, of 150 people that were doing river surveys across the country, and she was putting together data on macroinvertebrates, diatoms, fish, to assess the relative water quality of a given stream or river. She was pioneering this work. Well, I didn't get to meet, we arrived at the Academy of Natural Sciences. I didn't get to meet either Sam Roback or Ruth Patrick before our paper was presented. But we were sitting there ready, our paper was coming up in about 20 minutes. We had one more paper in front of us and then our paper. And as I said, Ellery was going to give the paper and I had prepared the graphs and tables. But we had rehearsed and he'd say to me, so what would you say with this graph? And I'd say, well, I'd say this. And he goes, well, what I'm going to say is this, and it's because this is why I'm saying it. And he would tell me. Anyway, 20 minutes before the talk, he leans over to me in the darkness of the room and says, I'm not feeling very well. I need to go to the restroom. You give the paper. Got up and walked out of the room. Before I could say, I'm not doing that, right? I mean, my heart was pounding. I didn't know which way to turn. I had never given a paper in front of anybody before. And when our paper came up, there's nothing I could do but just get up and give the paper. So when I was giving the paper, I looked in the back of the room, and there he was standing in the back of the room. Probably laughing his rear end off. But anyway, I gave the paper, and I did okay. I'm sure, I don't remember it, I was so nervous. But I did okay, and I heard that I did okay. And he said, we ought to really publish this paper. We ought to do it published. He said, so write it up, take what you've given me for the report, write it up, and we'll submit it to a... So we did, and so this is my first publication. It's in a really high impact journal called the Melsheimer Entomological Series. I was second author, even though I wrote the paper, but that's the way it worked back then, right? Anyway, that's the way it worked now, I guess, too, sometimes. But anyway, we published the paper, and he had another reason for taking me to the Academy of Natural Sciences. When we were driving home from the Academy, he was telling me about a multi-year assessment program that was going on in Bucks County of 40-plus streams, and that they were doing quantitative collections, just like Ruth Patrick, on algae, macroinvertebrates, macrophytes, microorganisms, and fish, and doing a lot of physical and chemical measurements. And it was patterned after the Ruth Patrick method. The university where I was at was involved with it. All the samples and data from that program were at the university. And he said when we got back to the university, he handed me these two annual reports from that project. And he said, here are all the data for macroinvertebrates, fish, everything. Take a look at these reports. And I don't want you to work for this program. I want you to keep working for me. But I want you to take a look at these reports and see if you can carve out a project that you could do for your senior thesis here at the university. And I'll give you 3 days to do that. This is like Tuesday. He says, come by my office Friday afternoon and let me know what you want to do. So I went through all the reports, and I noticed that there was one particular family of caddisflies, hydrocychids, that were present at all the stations, all the sampling streams, but the relative abundance varied from season to season and also from site to site in a big way. Like some sites had thousands of these things, and some sites only had a dozen or less. And I noticed when I pulled some of the vials out that it looked like there was quite a diversity across the county. So I proposed to him that I would pull all the vials of these specimens out and I would take them to species. And he would help me by linking me up with Sam Roback, and he would teach me how to identify the various genera and try to recognize the species or the morphospecies that I looked at. And so I did that, and he gave me, this was September, he gave me to December to finish it. He said, finish this by December because you need to submit it by then. So I did, and this is me a month after I turned 21. And that's the paper I produced. It was my senior thesis, The Effects of Changes in Water Quality on Larval Populations of the Insect Order Trichoptera. Okay, that never got published, but I gave him, I went into his office, I handed him the report. He said, okay, he said, here's my advice to you. Take this report, and in the next week, apply to Penn State University College of Entomology, and to Drexel University, the College of Water Resources. Fill out the application, include your report in it, and apply to graduate school for a master's. Meanwhile, I'm going to send your report and a brief letter to Dr. Ruth Patrick. And I'm going to say to her, here's this report. Was she taking on new graduate students like Bern Sweeney? He said, I'm just going to send a simple little letter. So he did that. Anyway, we didn't hear from Ruth Patrick for a month and a half. Nothing. There was nothing. In the interim, I had applied to Drexel and Penn State. I got accepted. I was offered money from both, and I was told, let us know by February 15th if you're going to take the offer. On February 2nd, or thereabouts, a little bit after that, this letter arrived to Ellery French. It was from Ruth Patrick, and it said, "I would very much like to have an interview with Mr. Sweeney. Please have him call my secretary and make an appointment with me." So while I'm reading, I'm in his office, I'm reading the letter, he picks up the phone and he's dialing the number, that number. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, I'm calling so you can make an appointment." And I said, "We haven't even talked about this." He said, and then he goes, "Oh, it's ringing, here," and he hands me the phone. I get Ruth Patrick's secretary on the phone, and she says, "Oh, Mr. Sweeney, Ruth told me that if you called, I should interrupt her no matter what she was doing. So I'm going to put her on the phone in just one moment." A couple of minutes, I'm not even a minute later, she gets on the phone and she says, "Bernard, I am very impressed by your caddisfly work. I am very impressed that you did multivariate statistical analysis on your data. We are exploring that approach here at the Academy with our survey data. But by gosh, you've done it." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "So what are your plans for graduate school?" And I told her that I had been accepted at Penn State, Drexel, and that and next week I had to make my mind up where I was going. So we talked for about an hour, and during that hour, we were interrupted repeatedly by phone calls from all across the country. Evelyn Hutchinson called from Yale. People from down in Washington, D.C. were calling. It was a very exciting moment for me. I'm in the presence of a really outstanding person here. At the end of an hour, she says to me, "Well, I'm busy. We have to terminate this." She says, "But let me give you some advice, young man. You can do with it whatever you want, but let me give you some advice. First of all," she said, "I think you should tell Penn State and Drexel to take a hike." That's what she said to me. "I think you should get in your car right now, drive across the other side of Philadelphia, and apply to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. And here is a 10-page application for an EPA fellowship for dissertation research related to water quality. Fill this out, send it to Washington, D.C., along with a copy of your senior thesis. I think you'll get accepted at University of Pennsylvania graduate school, although you didn't go to undergraduate school at an Ivy League school, but I think your GRE scores and all are good enough to get in. But I don't know about the fellowship. That's something they decide in Washington." And so I submitted, I applied to Penn. I submitted the application for the fellowship. And I told Penn State and Drexel to take a hike. I have to tell you that I went home that day. I had just gotten married 6 months earlier. I went home that day and told my wife what her advice was. And I told her that I was going to take her advice and that I was telling them to take a hike. And my wife said, "You're nuts. You have money in hand. We are living on $60 a week. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you had to be there. You had to be there and meet this lady." And I said, "I'm just going to do it because she is where I need to be." And she said, "Well, okay, you decide whatever you want to do. I'm behind you, no matter what you decide." So 2 months later, Ruth Patrick basically gave me news that I had gotten the fellowship at EPA. And she called me up and she said, "I need to take you need to come to Philadelphia. I need to take you out to the Stroud Water Research Center," which I just started 5 years ago, "because that's where you need to do your research." And I was like, "Oh, I never heard of this place," right? So I went down and she and I drove out to the Stroud Center. She was driving a yellow Volvo, 4-speed. She was 65 years old. And on the way out, we were at a red light, and I said, "Dr. Patrick," I said, "I'm surprised that you're driving a 4-speed Volvo and you don't have an automatic transmission." And she said, I think she took offense to it, and she said, "Young man," she said, "don't you know you have more control over a vehicle with a 4-speed than you do with an automatic?" I said, "I didn't know that." Okay, well, I know it now. But it was Ruth, you know, she's in control at all moments, right? She takes me to the Stroud Water Research Center. She doesn't take me in the building right away. She takes me to a greenhouse out back, big greenhouse, where she's doing her experimental work on the effects of heavy metals on transforming the diatom composition of natural stream communities. So she wanted to check on her latest results. Then she walked me in the back door of the Stroud Center, you know, into what was called the Flowing Streams Lab, or the wet lab. And there were these indoor flowing streams, and she said, "These are the first flowing streams in the world. This is the hub, the hotspot of stream and river ecology research. This is where you need to do your work." And then she introduced me to Robin Van Oot, who was the director that she had just hired a couple years before to head up the laboratory. And she had sent Robin a copy of my caddisfly thesis, right? And so Robin and I talked for about an hour. And Robin was a brilliant guy. He is a brilliant guy. And he just tore it to shreds. I mean, I was sitting there thinking like, oh my God, like why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? It was just amazing to me, and I was like, wow, okay. Anyway, after an hour, he decided that, okay, he would agree to be on my committee for graduate school, and I could do my research at Stroud, okay. So, Robin, that turned out to be a great moment for me because, as you know, at that moment, Ruth told me that Robin was working on a manuscript called The River Continuum Concept. And that paper, which he eventually published, that concept is the most highly cited paper in limnology, even to today. And so it was great for me to be in his presence and work with him. That wasn't all the trip to Stroud was more about also riding back. She said to me, "We are dealing with a very big problem in the United States. Below large dams that release water from the bottom, cold water from the bottom, and below power plants which release hot water at the top, we are seeing a mass extinction of aquatic species. Fish, algae, macroinvertebrates are going extinct downstream from these places." She handed me, when we got to the academy, an envelope that had 7 reprints in it, these 7 papers, some of which had just been published in 1972. She said, "Read these papers and think about the huge environmental problem. A reasonable hypothesis for this matter will be a meaningful contribution to limnology." That's what she said to me. What she was really saying to me was, "I've taken you on as my graduate student. This is what I want you to work on." I didn't realize at the time, but that's the way it was, okay? So I worked with Robin Van Oot closely with my thesis work. We did a lot of experimental field and laboratory work. 4 years later, I finished my dissertation. I published my first paper, my first real paper, in limnology and oceanography. Thank you, ASLO. Then he offered me a 2-year postdoc. I stayed at Stroud. My next paper I published in ecology, then another paper in limnology and oceanography, and then in 1978, 2 years after I finished my dissertation, he and I hit the ground running. We published a paper in Science about our thermal equilibrium hypothesis. Now, both of them were very excited. He was excited that I was willing to stay for a postdoc because I was thinking about applying for jobs elsewhere. Ruth was excited. She got her hypothesis. Everybody was excited. I was excited. They appointed me as an assistant curator in 1980. I got promoted to associate in 1988, and then, as you heard earlier, I became director of Stroud in 1989 and stayed that way for about 30 years. This is Ruth Patrick on the left in 2012 at the age of 105. at the Stroud Center, dedicating the Ruth Patrick Environmental Education Center. She died a year later at the age of 106. She was a wonderful lady. This is Robin Van Oot on the right, a picture taken 5 months ago. He's still alive, he's 90. He was giving a lecture at the Stroud Water Research Center. So, in answer to the question I posed initially, how did I wind up on this podium with the award? I met Drs. Ellery French, Ruth Patrick, and Robin Van Oot. I listened to what they said to me. I worked hard, and I focused my research on understanding natural stream and river ecosystems and applying that knowledge to help restore them. That's the story. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. It says we have 5 minutes and 3 seconds. We have time for a question. If anybody has a question, I'd be glad to try to answer it. Thank you. No. Well, either nobody's interested in what I said, or I covered it so thoroughly that nobody has a question. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Oh, here's a question. We have a question.
Thank you so much for that great talk. So you benefited a lot from great mentorship. Now that you're in a spot to be that mentor, what are some of the things that you make sure you do for your students or other people that work with you or for you?
First of all, I always make time for a student. And Ruth Patrick did the same thing. You could not pass Ruth Patrick in the hallway or anything as a student without her stopping, no matter how busy she was, stopping and saying to you, "What have you learned new today? What interesting paper have you read in the last week? And can you give me a 3-sentence summary of that paper?" That's the truth. I don't do that to students. But I do stop and say hi, and I will take the time, and when they're talking to me, I would try to listen. No matter how busy I am, I try to listen, and I try to give them good advice. And I try to learn from what they did. I try to be critical. I try to teach them being critical thinking. I mentioned to you that I was reading Science magazine on the way out. When I first started at Stroud, Robin Van Oot read Science weekly. The journal Science arrived at his office. He shut the doors and he sat there for a couple hours and read it from cover to cover, because he was just a broad thinker, and he said to me, "You need to do that same thing." So I joined and I started getting Science every week. We would get the paper. He would read it. I would be expected to read cover to cover the next day when I came into the Stroud Center. And he would talk to us, and we would say, "What new did we get out of this issue that might be of value to our research here at the Stroud Water Research Center? What new technology is there? What's happening in geology? What's happening in the medical sciences? Like, did you read?" And if you didn't pick up on it, he'd say, "Didn't you catch that?" I go, "Well, I missed that." Well, I try to instill that in students. Like, it's not all about book learning. You have to almost teach yourselves, and you have to be aggressive. And science is a 24/7 job. And if you don't think it is, then you better get out, because in order to stay up on things. And so I try to instill that kind of thing in students without being overbearing. And I've never refused to answer an email or a voicemail from students. I think it's a high priority for me, and it's worked. It makes me feel good.
Thank you. And since there's no one up here, you already gave some tips about how to be a good mentee, but if you had to give us top 2 things that make a good mentee like you were.
I think one is don't overwhelm the student. Oh, a mentee.
Yeah, mentee, the other
side.
So
you need to listen. You need to listen. You have to be a good listener, and you have to understand that there are people in this world that know a lot more about things than you do. And you have to listen. Sometimes their messages are cryptic, and sometimes you have to sort through them, and sometimes the messages will take you back. But when all is said and done, everybody's trying to make you a better person. And so you need to just listen and just try to sort through what the good messages are and put them to task. That was
Awesome.
what I'd
Thank
say.
you so much.
Thank you.
Could you please give, I know that there's a lot of benefits to being a mentee, but what are some benefits to being a mentor other than just feeling good? Like, what have you learned, or what?
Well, I mean, what I've learned is that if you're a good mentor and you produce really good students and they become successful, they start reviewing your proposals for you. Number one, right? They're reviewing your proposal for you. You're interacting with them in meetings, and you get a chance to say, hey, what are you thinking about? Where are you guys going with your, where's your research going and where you're at and everything like that? And feedback, like I always said to any of the students that I ever mentored, I said, I always want feedback. Like if you hear, like you got your ears down on the ground, you're hearing the vibes and everything. If you hear about like Sweeney like said this and that was a bunch of BS, like I need to know that. I need to know that if I'm going down the wrong path. Like I'm getting old now and I need to know when I'm starting to fumble the ball and losing it, right? And so you got to let me know. So yeah, that's a big benefit is that you feel good, you do good. Students, again, can feedback on you, can send students your way to work for you as technicians and so on and so forth. And so it's all good. It's a good circle to get into, and it's a productive circle. I think we're out of time. Well, we're minus 28 seconds. Thank you.